The sun has not yet risen over the 7 hills of Rome, and already the water is moving. It has been moving all night. In fact, as it always does, flowing through channels of stone and concrete, descending at a pace so gradual that you might not notice the slope at all if you walked alongside it. But the water notices. The water always knows which way is down, and it follows that path with the patience of centuries, moving from the springs in the distant hills toward the great city that sprawls across the landscape like a living thing, breathing and growing and always, always thirsty. The water that will eventually reach your cup this morning began its journey many miles away, perhaps 20 or 30 or even 50 miles from where you stand. It emerged from the earth as a spring, cold and clear, bubbling up through layers of limestone and volcanic rock that have filtered it and cleaned it and made it pure. The Romans knew about this spring long before they built the aqueduct to capture its flow. They tested the water, tasted it, watched the people who lived near it to see if they were healthy and strong. They observed whether the local plants grew well, whether the animals that drank from it thrived. Only after all these observations, conducted over months and perhaps years, did they decide that this spring was worthy of the effort and expense it would take to bring its water to Rome. The aqueduct begins with a structure called a Caput Aquae, which means the head of the water. This is where the spring water is collected and directed into the channel that will carry it toward the city. The Caput Aquae is not a grand structure, not one of those towering arcades of stone arches that people think of when they imagine a Roman aqueduct. It is, instead, a rather modest affair, built of carefully fitted stones and waterproof cement, designed to catch every drop of water that emerges from the spring, without allowing any to escape or become contaminated. The channel itself is also rather unremarkable to look at least here at the beginning of its journey. It is about 3 feet wide and perhaps 4 feet deep, lined with a type of concrete that the Romans call opus signinum, made from crushed tiles mixed with lime mortar. This creates a surface that is both waterproof and slightly rough, which helps prevent the buildup of algae and mineral deposits. The channel is covered with large flat stones, each one carefully shaped to fit snugly against its neighbors, creating a roof that keeps out leaves and debris and the bodies of small animals that might otherwise fall in and pollute the water. As the water begins its journey, it moves at a pace that would hardly be called rushing. If you were to place a small stick in the water and watch it float along, it might take several seconds to travel the length of your arm. This slowness is intentional, carefully calculated by the engineers who designed this aqueduct. Water that moves too quickly will erode the channel, wearing away at the concrete and stone, creating leaks and requiring constant expensive repairs. Water that moves too slowly will stagnate, becoming stale and foul and useless for drinking. The engineers have found the perfect balance, a gradient of descent that keeps the water fresh and moving, but not destructive, typically dropping only a few inches for every 100 feet of channel. For the first several miles, the aqueduct remains underground, buried beneath fields and hillsides. Every so often, there is a vertical shaft rising up from the channel to ground level. These shafts, called puttae in Latin, serve several purposes. During construction, they allowed workers to dig the channel from multiple points simultaneously speeding up the work. Now that the aqueduct is complete, they serve as maintenance access points, allowing workers to descend into the channel to clean it or repair damage. They also provide ventilation, allowing air to circulate through the tunnel and preventing the buildup of stale air or dangerous gases that might emerge from the earth. The water continues its journey, mile after mile, following the contours of the land. The engineers who planned this route spent months surveying the terrain, using instruments called the chorobates and the groma to ensure that the channel maintained its gentle downward slope. The chorobates was a long wooden frame, about 20 feet in length, with grooves on its upper surface that could be filled with water to check if the frame was level. The groma was simpler, essentially a cross-shaped frame with plumb lines hanging from each arm, used to establish straight lines and right angles. With the simple tools and an enormous amount of patience and skill, the engineers mapped out a route that would carry water across an incredibly complex landscape of hills and valleys and ridges. Sometimes the terrain presents a challenge that cannot be solved simply by digging a channel underground. When the aqueduct needs to cross a valley, the engineers have several options. If the valley is shallow, they might simply let the channel descend into it and then climb up the other side. Though this requires careful calculation to ensure the water will still flow upward if the exit point is lower than the entry point. More commonly, they build an arcade, a series of stone arches that carry the channel across the valley at a consistent height. These arcades are the most visible part of the aqueduct, the part that still stands in many places 2,000 years after their construction, and they represent some of the most impressive engineering achievements of the Roman world. Each arch is built without mortar, the stones carefully cut and shaped so that they fit together perfectly, held in place by their own weight and the pressure exerted by the stones around them. The largest stones, called voussoirs, form the arch itself, each one slightly wedge-shaped, so that when they are assembled they create a perfect curve. At the top of each arch is a keystone, the final piece to be put in place, which locks all the other stones together and allows the arch to support enormous weight. Building these arches required tremendous skill and equally tremendous patience. First, a wooden framework called centering had to be constructed, forming a temporary support in the exact shape of the arch. Then the stones were laid on top of this framework, starting from both sides and working towards the center. Only when the keystone was finally put in place could the wooden framework be removed. And even then, it was done carefully and gradually, allowing the arch to settle into its final position without any sudden stress that might cause it to collapse. The arcade you see rising above the landscape might contain dozens or even hundreds of these arches, stretching across the valley in a long, gentle curve or a perfectly straight line, depending on the terrain. On top of these arches sits the channel, the same covered stone channel that has been carrying the water underground for miles, now elevated 50 or 60 or even 100 feet above the valley floor. The water inside has no idea it is now so high above the ground. It continues flowing at the same gentle pace, following the same subtle downward gradient moving toward Rome. As morning arrives and the sun begins to warm the stones of the aqueduct, the water inside remains cool, protected from the heat by the thick stone slabs that cover the channel. This is important because warm water is more prone to developing algae and bacteria, and it also tastes less pleasant to drink. The Romans understood this even without modern knowledge of microbiology, and they designed their aqueducts to keep the water as cool and fresh as possible throughout its journey. The water continues for hours, traveling through the cool darkness of the underground channel, emerging briefly into the filtered light beneath the stone covering whenever the channel crosses above ground on an arcade, then returning to darkness as it plunges back into a tunnel carved through a hillside. The landscape changes around the aqueduct as it moves closer to the city. The wild hills covered in scrub vegetation give way to cultivated fields and olive groves. Small farms appear along the roadside, their inhabitants already awake and beginning their daily work. Some of these farmers might glance up at the arcade as they pass beneath it, barely noticing the massive stone structure that has been part of their landscape since before they were born, and their parents were born, and perhaps even their grandparents. Eventually, miles from where it began, the aqueduct approaches the city itself. Rome in the early morning is already stirring, with bakers lighting their ovens, and shop owners opening their shutters, and street cleaners sweeping the previous day's debris into the gutters. The aqueduct enters the city at a structure called a castellum, which is essentially a large settling tank where the water can slow down and any sediment it has picked up during its journey can settle to the bottom. The castellum is built of brick and concrete, with thick walls and a roof to protect it from contamination. Inside, the water spreads out into a large shallow pool, perhaps 20 feet across and only a few feet deep. Here, for the first time since leaving the spring, the water stops moving forward. It sits in the castellum for an hour or two, just long enough for any dirt or sand to sink to the bottom, but not so long that it becomes stale. Around the edges of the pool are several openings, each one the beginning of a distribution pipe that will carry water to a different part of the city. Some of these pipes are made of lead, bent and shaped by skilled plumbers into whatever configuration is needed to navigate the crowded streets of Rome. Others are made of terracotta, clay pipes about a foot in diameter that are fitted together end to end to create a continuous channel. The pipes that exit the castellum are of different sizes, and this is not arbitrary. Each pipe is assigned to serve a specific purpose, and its diameter has been carefully calculated based on how much water it should carry. The largest pipes carry water to the public fountains that are scattered throughout every neighborhood in Rome, providing free water to anyone who needs it. Smaller pipes might serve the public baths, those enormous complexes where Romans of all social classes come to bathe and socialize and conduct business. Even smaller pipes might serve private homes, though only wealthy individuals can afford to pay for a private water connection, and even they must obtain permission from the water commissioner and pay an annual fee based on the size of their pipe. Let us follow one of these pipes as it makes its way through the early morning streets of Rome. This particular pipe is made of lead, about 4 inches in diameter, and it serves a neighborhood on the slope of the Esquiline Hill. The pipe runs along the side of the street, just beneath the surface, or sometimes exposed in a shallow trench. Every so often, there is a vertical pipe rising up from the main line, capped with a bronze spout. This is a public fountain, and already a few people are gathering around it, holding clay jars and leather bags and bronze vessels, waiting to fill them with fresh water. A woman approaches the fountain, carrying a large clay amphora balanced on her shoulder. She is a slave, sent by her mistress to collect the household's daily water supply. She has done this task every morning for years, and she performs it with the automatic efficiency of long practice. She places the amphora on the ground beside the fountain and removes the wooden stopper from its mouth. Then she takes the amphora in both hands and holds it beneath the bronze spout, tipping it at an angle so the water will run in smoothly without splashing. The water that pours from the spout is the same water that emerged from the spring in the distant hills many hours ago. It has travelled dozens of miles, descended perhaps a few hundred feet in elevation, passed through miles of underground channel and across valley-spanning arcades, sat briefly in the settling tank of the castellum, and flowed through several hundred feet of lead pipe. And yet, it is still fresh and cold and pure, clean enough to drink without any treatment or boiling. The woman fills her amphora, a process that takes several minutes as the water flows at a steady but not rapid pace from the spout. While she waits, she watches the other people at the fountain. An old man fills a leather bag, probably to carry water to his small apartment in one of the multi-story tenement buildings that house most of Rome's population. A young boy fills a small clay cup and drinks directly from it, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand when he is finished. Two women chat while the containers fill, discussing the rising price of bread and whether it will rain later in the day. When the woman's amphora is full, she lifts it carefully and settles it back onto her shoulder, balancing its weight with the ease of long practice. An amphora full of water weighs perhaps 40 or 50 pounds, but she carries it as if it weighs nothing, walking back up the street toward her mistress's house with steady, unhurried steps. This trip to the fountain is part of her daily routine, one of dozens of small tasks that fill her days. She will make this same journey again this afternoon, and again tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, until the seasons change and the years pass, and she grows old, carrying water from the fountain to the house and back again. Back at the fountain, the water continues to flow from the bronze spout, just as it has flowed for hours and will continue to flow for hours more. Unlike a well, which must be drawn from by hand, and which can run dry if too many people draw from it at once, the fountain is supplied by a constant flow from the aqueduct. As long as the spring in the distant hills continues to produce water, and as long as the aqueduct remains intact, the fountain will never run dry. This reliability is one of the great achievements of Roman engineering, and it is something that the people of Rome mostly take for granted, just as they take for granted the straight paved roads and the sturdy stone buildings and the massive temples in the Forum. Let us now follow the woman as she carries her amphora back to her mistress's house. The house is a typical Roman domus, a single-family dwelling arranged around a central courtyard called an atrium. She enters through the front door, which opens directly onto the street, and crosses through the atrium to reach the kitchen at the back of the house. The kitchen is a modest room with a raised hearth for cooking, several large storage jars set into the floor, and a stone counter for food preparation. The woman carefully pours the water from her amphora into one of the storage jars, a large ceramic vessel called a dolium that can hold several days' worth of water for the household. The mistress of the house will use this water for many purposes throughout the day. Some of it will be used for cooking, boiled with grain to make porridge, or mixed with wine to dilute it to a drinkable strength. Some will be used for washing, either for personal hygiene or for cleaning dishes and floors and laundry. A small amount might be used for the household's small garden, though most Romans do not waste drinking water on plants, when rainwater can serve that purpose just as well. But before any of that, the mistress herself will drink a cup of this water, freshly drawn from the fountain, and still cool from its journey through the underground channels of the aqueduct. She will drink it without thinking much about where it came from or how it arrived in her house, just as you might drink a glass of water from your own tap, without contemplating the complex infrastructure of pipes and pumps and treatment plant that made it possible. This casual acceptance of reliable clean water is perhaps the greatest luxury that Rome provides to its citizens, more valuable than gold or silk or exotic spices from distant lands. Meanwhile, the water in the aqueduct continues to flow toward Rome, just as it has every hour of every day since the aqueduct was completed. New water is always arriving to replace the water that has just been drawn from the fountains, maintaining a constant flow that never ceases. During the night, when fewer people draw water from the fountains, the excess water overflows from the basins and runs into the sewers, helping to flush away the waste and keep the city clean. Nothing is wasted in this system. Every drop of water serves a purpose, even if that purpose is merely to wash the streets or to provide a pleasant sound of running water in the forum. In another part of the city, the same aqueduct that supplies the neighborhood fountain also provides water to one of Rome's great public baths. These baths are enormous complexes that might cover several city blocks, containing multiple pools of different temperatures, exercise rooms, gardens, libraries, and shops. The bathhouse has its own connection to the aqueduct, a large pipe that supplies hundreds of gallons of water every hour to maintain the pools and fountains, and to replace the water that is lost to evaporation and to bathers leaving the building with wet skin and hair. The water arrives at the bathhouse through the same kind of lead pipe that supplies the neighborhood fountain, but this pipe is much larger, perhaps 8 or 10 inches in diameter. It enters the building underground and rises up to a reservoir on the roof, a large tank that holds several thousand gallons of water. From this reservoir, smaller pipes descend to supply the various facilities within the building. Some pipes carry water to the cold plunge pool, the frigidarium, where bathers can cool off after spending time in the hot rooms. Other pipes supply the warm pool, the tepidarium, where the water is heated to a comfortable temperature by a system of furnaces and pipes built into the walls and floor. The hottest water goes to the caldarium, the hot room, where the temperature might reach 100 degrees or more. This water is heated by a hypocaust, an underfloor heating system where hot air from a furnace circulates through spaces beneath the floor and within the walls. The hypocaust is fired by wood or charcoal, and slaves must constantly tend the furnace to maintain the proper temperature. The heat from the hypocaust warms the water in the pools and also heats the air in the room. creating a steamy atmosphere that opens the pores and induces sweating, which the Romans believed to be healthful. After the bathers have moved through the sequence of hot and cold rooms, scraped the oil and sweat from their skin with curved bronze implements called strigils, perhaps received a massage or had their hair trimmed by the bathhouse staff, they emerge clean and refreshed into the afternoon sun. The water they bathed in will drain away into the sewers, joining the overflow from the fountains and the rainwater from the gutters, or flowing downhill through the massive stone channels of the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, eventually emptying into the Tiber River downstream from the city. But even as this water is being used and drained away, more water is arriving from the aqueduct, an endless supply flowing from the spring in the hills. The spring itself is fed by rainfall that has soaked into the ground, percolated through layers of rock and soil, and emerged again as fresh, clean water. This cycle of rain and spring and aqueduct and fountain and drain and river and evaporation and rain again is as constant and reliable as the sunrise, and it is what makes life in Rome possible. Not all the water from the aqueduct goes to fountains and baths. Some of it is diverted to serve the practical needs of various industries and businesses throughout the city. A fuller, whose business is cleaning and bleaching woolen cloth, uses large quantities of water to rinse the cloth after treating it with various chemicals. The process is lengthy and complex, and it requires a constant supply of fresh water to be successful. The fuller pays a fee to the water commissioner for a private connection to the aqueduct, and this connection provides enough water to keep his business running efficiently. Similarly, a tanner who works with animal hides to produce leather needs large amounts of water for soaking the hides and rinsing away the lime and other chemicals used in the tanning process. A dyer who colors fabric needs water to dissolve dyes and to rinse the finished cloth. A baker needs water to make dough, though he might also use water from his own well if he has one. All of these businesses depend on the reliable supply of water provided by the aqueduct, and they pay fees based on the size of their connections and the amount of water they use. Even the public toilets, those long bench-like structures with rows of circular holes where Romans sit side by side to relieve themselves, are supplied with water from the aqueducts. A constant flow of water runs beneath the seats, carrying waste away into the sewers. This is not the fresh drinking water from the spring, but rather the overflow from fountains and baths. Water that has already served its primary purpose and is now being put to a secondary use before finally being discharged into the sewer system. This cascading use of water, where the same water serves multiple purposes as it flows from the aqueduct to the fountain to the drain, is another example of Roman efficiency and practical engineering. As afternoon arrives and the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, the demand for water increases throughout the city. More people visit the public baths, seeking relief from the heat. More households send slaves to the fountains to replenish their water supplies. More businesses use water in their various processes, but the flow from the aqueduct never diminishes. The spring in the hills continues to produce water at the same steady rate, and the aqueduct continues to deliver it to the city, maintaining a supply that is always sufficient to meet the demand. The aqueduct that supplies this neighborhood is just one of 11 major aqueducts that bring water to Rome. each one drawing from a different spring or river in the surrounding countryside. Together, these aqueducts can deliver over 300 million gallons of water to the city every day, enough to supply more than 1 million inhabitants with ample water for drinking, bathing, cooking, and all the other uses that urban life requires. This is an astonishing achievement, unmatched by any other city in the ancient world, and it would not be equaled again until the 19th century, when modern cities began building their own complex water supply systems. The construction of these aqueducts represented an enormous investment of resources, both in terms of money and labor. A major aqueduct might take 10 or 15 years to build, employing thousands of workers, including surveyors, engineers, stonemasons, carpenters, and common laborers. The costs could run into millions of sesterces, the Roman currency, making an aqueduct one of the most expensive public works projects the Romans ever undertook. But the emperors and senators who authorized these expenditures understood that a reliable water supply was essential to the health and growth of the city, and they were willing to invest the necessary resources to ensure that supply. Once constructed, the aqueduct required constant maintenance to keep them functioning properly. The channels had to be cleaned regularly to remove sediment and mineral deposits that would otherwise reduce the flow of water. Leaks had to be found and repaired. Illegal connections had to be detected and removed. For these purposes, Rome employed a large staff of water workers, including inspectors, maintenance crews, and a force of armed guards to prevent theft and vandalism. The water commissioner, an important official appointed by the emperor, oversaw this entire operation, managing thousands of workers and an annual budget that ran into hundreds of thousands of sesterces. The importance of this position can be seen in the fact that it was often held by distinguished former magistrates and military commanders. Sextus Julius Frontinus, who served as water commissioner at the end of the 1st century, was a former consul who had commanded legions in Britain and Germania before taking on this civilian role. He wrote a detailed treatise about the aqueducts, describing their sources, lengths, gradients, and daily flow rates, as well as the laws and regulations governing their use. His work provides us with invaluable information about how the Roman water system functioned, and it demonstrates the seriousness with which Rome approached the management of this vital resource. As evening approaches and the sun begins to descend toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the streets of Rome, the water continues to flow. The patterns of use change as people return home from the baths and begin preparing their evening meals. The fountains that were crowded in the morning are quieter now, though there is always someone filling a container. Always the sound of water splashing into stone basins. Always the overflow running into the gutters and eventually into the sewers. In the household where we watched the slave woman fill her amphora this morning, the mistress of the house is now preparing dinner. She dips a bronze ladle into the dolium, the large storage jar that holds the household's water, and pours water into a cooking pot. She adds grain and some dried vegetables and sets the pot on the hearth to cook. The water that she uses for this simple meal is the same water that flowed from the spring this morning, that travelled dozens of miles through the aqueduct, that was drawn from the public fountain, that was carried home in the amphora. It has served its purpose well, transforming from cold spring water to warm cooking water, helping to create the simple porridge that will feed this household this evening. After the meal is eaten and the dishes are washed, again using water from the dolium, the household settles in for the night. The water in the storage jar is still half full, enough to last until tomorrow morning, when the slave woman will again make her trip to the fountain. Outside, in the darkening streets, the fountains continue to flow, their bronze spouts never ceasing, the water splashing into stone basins and overflowing into the gutters with a soft, constant sound that provides a backdrop to the evening sounds of the city. As night falls completely, and most of the city's inhabitants retire to their beds, the aqueduct continues its work. The water continues to flow through the underground channels, continues to cross the valley-spanning arcades, continues to fill the castellum, and flow through the distribution pipes to the fountains and baths and private connections throughout the city. The night watchmen making their rounds through the streets can hear the sound of running water, a reassuring sound that tells them all is well, that the city's most vital system is functioning as it should. In the hills far from the city, at the source of the aqueduct, the spring continues to bubble up from the earth, cold and clear and constant. The water that emerges now will not reach Rome until tomorrow morning, after hours of travelling through the darkness of the underground channel. But it will arrive, as it always does, maintaining the endless flow that makes life in Rome possible. The spring does not know about the city it serves, does not know about the million people who depend on its water, does not know about the magnificent engineering achievement that has been built to capture and channel its flow. It simply emerges from the earth, as it has for thousands of years, as it will for thousands more, providing the essential element that all life requires. The Romans who built this aqueduct, and the hundreds of others like it throughout the empire, understood something fundamental about civilization. They understood that cities cannot exist without water, that urban life requires a reliable supply of clean water, in quantities that far exceed what local sources can provide. They understood that bringing this water from distant springs and rivers required not just engineering skill, but also political will and economic resources. They understood that building and maintaining an aqueduct was one of the highest purposes to which a society could dedicate itself, because water is life, and a reliable water supply makes possible all the other achievements of civilization, from art and literature to commerce and government. And so the water flows, night after night, season after season, year after year, century after century. Long after the emperors who authorized these aqueducts have died and been forgotten. Long after the engineers who designed them and the workers who built them have passed into history, the water continues to flow. Some of these aqueducts will still be carrying water more than 2,000 years after their construction, still supplying cities with fresh, clean water, using the same principles of gravity and gradual descent that the Roman engineers discovered and perfected. As midnight approaches and the city of Rome sleeps, the only sounds are the soft footsteps of the night watch, the occasional bark of a dog, and the constant gentle sound of water flowing through channels and fountains and gutters. The water that is flowing now left the spring before sunset, travelled through the darkness of the underground channel, while the city ate its dinner and prepared for bed, and is only now arriving at the castellum to be distributed to the fountains. By morning, this water will have been drawn and carried and used and drained away. A new water will have arrived to take its place, maintaining the endless cycle that keeps the city alive. The aqueduct itself, that massive structure of stone and concrete that stretches for miles across the countryside, stands silent and dark in the night. But inside its covered channels, the water continues to move, following the gentle downward slope that the engineers calculated so carefully, moving at the steady pace that prevents erosion and maintains freshness, flowing toward the city that depends on it absolutely. This flow is as constant as the stars overhead, as reliable as the sunrise, as essential as the air we breathe. Think about that the next time you fill a glass of water from your tap without giving it a second thought. Consider the infrastructure that makes that possible: the pipes and pumps and treatment plants, the engineers and maintenance workers and inspectors who keep the system running. Think about the Romans who built their aqueducts 2,000 years ago with nothing but simple tools and human labor and geometric principles, who created a system so well designed that parts of it are still functioning today. Think about that slave woman carrying her amphora of water through the streets of ancient Rome, performing the same tasks she performs every day, taking for granted the marvel of engineering that makes her simple errand possible. The water flows. It has always flowed. As long as there are springs in the hills and channels to guide their water to where it is needed, it will continue to flow. This is the gift that Rome gave to the world, this understanding that water can be managed and directed and delivered, that cities can be supplied with clean water even when they are far from natural sources. That engineering and political will can overcome the limitations of geography and provide for millions of people. The aqueducts of Rome stand a testament to this achievement. Their massive stone arches spanning valleys, their underground channels carrying their precious cargo of water, their fountains flowing day and night, never ceasing, always reliable, always there when needed. The sun will rise tomorrow, on the hills where the springs emerge from the earth. The water will continue to flow into the channels of the aqueducts. It will travel its long journey to the city. It will pour from the bronze spouts of the fountains. It will fill the clay amphorae of the water carriers. It will be used for cooking and bathing and washing and all the countless other purposes that require water. And then it will drain away into the sewers and flow into the river and eventually evaporate into the sky, only to fall as rain on the distant hills and soak into the ground and emerge again as spring water, beginning the cycle anew. This is how Rome lives. This is how any city lives. Through water, through the careful management of that water, through the infrastructure built to deliver it where it is needed. The Romans understood this better than any civilization before them, and they built accordingly, creating a system of aqueducts that supplied their capital with more water per person than most modern cities provide to their inhabitants. They did this not with pumps or powered machinery, but with simple gravity, with careful surveying and patient construction, with stone and concrete and lead pipes, with the accumulated knowledge of generations of engineers and the labor of thousands of workers. The result was a system that functioned so well, so reliably, for so long, that the people of Rome could take it completely for granted. They could turn on a fountain, or visit a bath, or fill their cooking pots without ever thinking about where the water came from, or how it arrived. They could live their lives secure in the knowledge that the water would always be there, always flowing, always clean and fresh and abundant. This security, this confidence in their infrastructure, was perhaps Rome's greatest achievement, greater than their conquests, or their laws, or their literature, because it made all those other achievements possible. As the night deepens and the city sleeps more soundly, the water continues its work. It flows through the channels, drops from the spouts, fills the basins, drains into the gutters, finds its way to the river. It is the lifeblood of the city, as essential as blood is to the body. Without it, Rome would die in a matter of days. With it, Rome can thrive and grow and endure for centuries, building ever more elaborate fountains and baths, supporting an ever larger population, spreading its influence across the known world. In the castellum, the settling tank where the aqueduct water arrives before being distributed through the city, the water sits quietly in the darkness, moving slowly, allowing sediment to settle to the bottom. The castellum will be cleaned tomorrow, as it is cleaned every week, with workers descending into the tank to shovel out the accumulated sand and silt and dispose of it outside the city. This maintenance is essential to keeping the water clean and the system functioning properly. It is just one of hundreds of maintenance tasks that must be performed regularly to keep the aqueducts working. But the Romans understand that this investment of time and labor is worthwhile, that a well-maintained aqueduct is worth far more than the cost of its upkeep. The workers who will clean the castellum tomorrow are specialists trained in the particular requirements of water system maintenance. They know how to identify cracks in the concrete and patch them properly. They know how to detect unauthorized connections and remove them without damaging the main pipes. They know how to measure the flow rate of the water and recognize when it has dropped below acceptable levels, indicating a problem somewhere in the system. They take pride in their work, even though it is dirty and sometimes dangerous, because they understand that they are maintaining one of Rome's most important assets. As dawn approaches and the sky begins to lighten in the east, the city starts to wake. The bakers who have been working through the night light their ovens to bake the day's bread. The street cleaners emerge from their quarters to begin sweeping the streets. The vendors who sell food and goods from small stalls begin setting up their wares. And the slave woman in the household we have been observing stirs from her pallet, prepares herself for the day, and picks up the empty amphora to make her morning trip to the fountain. She walks through streets that are still mostly quiet, though more people are emerging from their houses with each passing minute. When she reaches the fountain, she finds only one other person there, an old man filling his leather water bag. She greets him politely, as she does every morning, and he nods in response, as he does every morning. This ritual is as much a part of the beginning of the day as the sunrise itself, as predictable and regular as the flow of water from the fountain. As she fills her amphora, she does not think about the journey this water has made to reach her. She does not think about the spring in the distant hills, or the miles of underground channel, or the valley-spanning arcade, or the settling tank, or the lead pipes beneath the street. She simply fills her amphora and lifts it to her shoulder and walks home. her mind occupied with the day's tasks that await her. This is a true measure of the aqueduct's success, that it functions so well that those who depend on it can ignore it completely, can take it for granted, as if fresh water appearing from a bronze spout in the middle of the city is the most natural thing in the world. But it is not natural. It is artificial, created by human effort and ingenuity. It is the result of years of planning and surveying and construction. It is maintained by constant work and vigilance. It requires organization and management and a significant portion of the city's budget. It is, in short, a triumph of civilization over nature, a demonstration that humans can improve upon the natural world, can take a spring that emerges in an inconvenient location and redirect its water to where it is needed most. The Romans were not unique in understanding that water is essential to life and that cities need water. Every civilization has understood this, but the Romans were unique in the scale and sophistication of their solution to the problem. They built not one aqueduct, but dozens, not just for Rome, but for cities throughout their empire. They standardized the design and construction techniques, allowing them to build new aqueducts more quickly and efficiently. They developed a body of knowledge about water management that was passed down through generations of engineers. They created institutions and legal frameworks for managing water resources, ensuring that the aqueducts would be properly maintained long after those who built them were gone. This institutional knowledge, this understanding that water infrastructure requires long-term planning and maintenance, may be the most important legacy of the Roman aqueducts. Many ancient civilizations built impressive monuments that serve no practical purpose, temples and tombs and palaces that demonstrated wealth and power, but did nothing to improve the daily lives of ordinary people. The Romans built those things too, of course, but they also built aqueducts, which served a vital practical purpose, while also demonstrating the engineering prowess of Roman civilization. The aqueducts were, in a sense, functional monuments. They were built to last, constructed with the same care and quality as a temple or palace, but they were used every day by everyone in the city. They were democratic in a way that most ancient monuments were not, providing benefits to rich and poor alike. A wealthy citizen might have a private connection delivering water directly to his house, but everyone could access the public fountains. Everyone could visit the public baths. Everyone benefited from the cleaner streets and functioning sewers that the aqueducts made possible. As morning progresses and more people fill the streets of Rome, the demand for water increases. More women arrive at the fountain with their amphorae. Men come to fill containers for their shops and businesses. Children are sent on errands to fetch water for their households. The fountain flows steadily through all of this, never running dry, always providing enough water for everyone who needs it. This reliability is what makes the fountain truly valuable. More valuable than its bronze fittings or stone basin. More valuable than the decorative sculptures that might adorn it. In the wealthier neighborhoods of Rome, where some houses have private water connections, the morning routine is slightly different. Instead of sending a slave to the fountain, water is available inside the house itself, piped in through a lead connection that has been purchased from the water commissioner. This water flows into a basin or cistern within the house, from which it can be drawn as needed. This is a convenience that only the wealthy can afford, but it demonstrates the flexibility of the Roman water system, its ability to serve different needs and different customers. The water that flows through these private connections is the same water that flows through the public fountains, drawn from the same aqueduct, pure and fresh and cold. The only difference is that the private customer has paid for the convenience of having it delivered directly to their house, saving them or their slaves the daily trip to the fountain. Even with this private connection, however, most households still use the water sparingly, recognizing its value even as they take for granted its availability. Throughout the morning, as the city comes fully to life, the aqueduct continues its steady work. Water flows from the spring, through the channel, across the arcade, into the castellum, through the distribution pipes, and out of the fountains and into the baths and private connections. The system operates like a living organism, distributing its vital fluid throughout the body of the city, providing what is needed where it is needed, responding automatically to changing demands through the simple physics of water flowing downhill. The engineers who designed this system understood these principles of hydraulics, even without the mathematical equations that modern engineers use. They understood that water seeks its own level, that it will flow from higher elevations to lower ones, that it exerts pressure that increases with depth. They used this understanding to create a system that required no pumps, no active management, no constant intervention. Once built and filled with water, the aqueduct simply worked, day after day, year after year, requiring only periodic maintenance to keep it functioning. This passive reliability is perhaps the most impressive aspect of the Roman aqueduct system. Unlike a water supply system that depends on pumps, which can break down and require fuel to operate, the gravity-fed aqueduct has no moving parts to wear out. Unlike a system that depends on wells, which can run dry during droughts, the aqueduct draws its water from springs that are fed by deep aquifers that remain full even in dry years. Unlike a system that depends on the river, which can be polluted by upstream users, the aqueduct captures water at its source and protects it throughout its journey to the city. As midday arrives and the sun beats down on the streets of Rome, the public baths become increasingly popular. People seek relief from the heat by immersing themselves in the cool water of the frigidarium, or by sitting in the shaded porticos that surround the bath complex. The bathhouse continues to receive a steady supply of water from the aqueduct, enough to keep all the pools full, and all the fountains flowing, and all the visitors clean and refreshed. The water that fills these pools will be completely replaced several times today, as old water drains out through the outlets in the pool bottoms, and fresh water flows in through the pipes that supply the bath. This constant replacement ensures that the water remains clean and fresh, free from the oils and dirt that would accumulate if the same water were kept in the pools for days or weeks. This frequent changing of the water is only possible because the aqueduct provides such an abundant supply, far more than would be available from wells or cisterns. Back at the household where we have been observing the daily routine, the amphora of water that was filled this morning is now half empty. It has been used for cooking and drinking and washing throughout the morning. By late afternoon, it will be empty, and the slave woman will need to make another trip to the fountain. This pattern repeats every day, a rhythm as regular as the beating of a heart. Water being drawn and used and replenished, maintaining the household supply at a level sufficient for all its needs. The mistress of the house might use some of the water from the amphora to wash her face and hands before the midday meal. The water is cool and refreshing, even though it has been sitting in the clay vessel for several hours. She pours it from a smaller jug into a bronze basin, washes quickly and efficiently, then dries herself with a linen towel. The used water is not simply discarded, but is saved for cleaning the floors or washing the dishes, or some other secondary purpose. Nothing is wasted in a Roman household, especially not water, even though the aqueduct provides an apparently inexhaustible supply. As afternoon wears on toward evening, the patterns of water use shift again. The baths become less crowded as people return home to prepare their evening meals. The fountains see fewer visitors as households that fetched water in the morning still have sufficient supplies. The shops and businesses that use water in their work begin to close for the day. But the aqueduct continues to flow at the same steady rate, providing water whether it is needed or not, because the flow from the spring cannot be easily started and stopped, and because the engineers designed the system to always provide more water than the minimum required, ensuring that demand would never exceed supply. This excess water, the water that flows from the fountains, even when no one is drawing from them, serves important secondary purposes. It overflows from the fountain basins and runs into the street gutters, where it helps wash away the accumulated dirt and debris of the day. This overflow water then flows into the sewers, where it helps flush away waste and keep the system flowing smoothly. Finally, the water empties into the Tiber River below the city, having served every purpose the Romans could devise for it, having given up every bit of usefulness it possessed. This cascade of uses, from drinking water to washing water to sewer water, demonstrates Roman efficiency and practicality. The same water serves multiple purposes as it flows through the city, maximizing the return on the enormous investment required to build and maintain the aqueduct. Every drop is used at least once, and most drops are used several times before finally being discharged into the river. As evening approaches and the heat of the day begins to dissipate, people emerge from their houses and shops to enjoy the cooler air. They walk through the streets, chatting with neighbors, visiting the markets that remain open late, stopping at the fountains to splash water on their faces or to refill their water containers. The fountains are once again busy, though not as busy as they were in the morning, providing water to those who need it, providing a pleasant sound and a touch of coolness to the warm evening air. In the castellum, the settling tank that receives water from the aqueduct before distributing it through the city, a maintenance crew is preparing to perform the weekly cleaning. They have closed off the flow from some of the distribution pipes, allowing the water level in the tank to drop slightly. When the level is low enough, they will descend into the tank and shovel out the accumulated sediment, working quickly so that the tank can be refilled and the normal distribution resumed before morning. This maintenance work is done at night when water demand is lower and the disruption to service will be minimal. The workers carry oil lamps to light their work in the darkness of the tank. They are experienced and efficient, having performed this task many times before. They work steadily but without rushing, ensuring that the job is done properly. By midnight, the tank will be clean and the flow will be fully restored. And no one in the city will notice that the maintenance was performed except for perhaps a slight discoloration in the water that will clear within an hour. As the city settles into the quiet of evening, families gather for their meals. The porridge or bread or vegetables that they eat have all been prepared with water from the aqueduct, either directly as an ingredient or indirectly through the washing of food or cooking vessels. The wine that they drink has been diluted with water, as Romans always dilute their wine, considering it barbarous to drink it undiluted. This water, which has travelled so far and through such impressive engineering to reach their table, is taken completely for granted, considered so ordinary that no one remarks upon it or thinks about it at all. This ordinariness, this complete integration into daily life, is the ultimate success of the aqueduct system. It has become so reliable and so abundant that it is invisible, noticed only when something goes wrong, when a pipe breaks or a channel becomes blocked and the fountain stops flowing. Those interruptions are rare and are usually fixed within hours by the large staff of maintenance workers that the water commissioner employs. But when everything is working as it should, which is almost all the time, the aqueduct simply provides water day after day, year after year, as reliable as the sun and the moon. After the evening meal is finished, and the dishes are washed and put away, the household prepares for sleep. The amphora that was filled at the morning fountain, and then again at the afternoon fountain, now sits in the corner of the kitchen, still containing enough water for the night, and tomorrow morning. The family members wash their hands and faces one last time before retiring to their beds. The oil lamps are extinguished. The house falls silent except for the breathing of its sleeping inhabitants. Outside in the street, the fountain continues to flow, its bronze spout gleaming faintly in the starlight, the water splashing into the stone basin with a soft, continuous sound. This sound is part of the nighttime soundscape of Rome, along with the occasional footsteps of someone walking home late, the bark of a dog, the cry of an infant, the whisper of wind through the trees. The fountain will flow all through the night, as it flows all through every night, providing water to anyone who needs it, maintaining the overflow into the gutters and sewers, keeping the city's water system active and flowing. In the hills far from the city, at the source of the aqueduct, the spring continues to bubble up from the earth. The water that emerges now, cold and clear and pure, will reach Rome tomorrow, will flow from the fountains, will be carried to homes and businesses, will be used for all the purposes that water serves in a city. And then it will be replaced by more water and more water after that, in an endless cycle that has continued for years and will continue for years more, for decades, for centuries, for as long as the spring flows and the aqueduct remains intact. The moon rises over the city, illuminating the rooftops and the temples and the aqueduct arcades that march across the distant landscape. The arcades stand silent and magnificent in the moonlight, their rows of arches creating a rhythm across the valley, the massive stones fitted together so perfectly that mortar was barely needed to hold them in place. These structures were built to last, and they will last, outliving the empire that built them, outliving the civilization that they served. standing for centuries after Rome itself has fallen and been forgotten. A testament to the skill and ambition of the engineers who designed them and the workers who built them. The water inside the covered channel atop these arcades continues to flow, following its downward path toward the city. The moonlight cannot penetrate the thick stone slabs that cover the channel, so the water flows in darkness, just as it flows in darkness beneath the ground for most of its journey. But it flows nonetheless, constant and reliable, requiring no light to find its way, needing only gravity and the careful gradient established by the engineers to guide it along its path. In the city, most people sleep, but some remain awake. The night watch patrols the streets, keeping order and watching for fires and crime. A few shops remain open, serving those who work at night or who keep unusual hours. The public baths will remain open until late, though they will close before midnight to allow time for cleaning before they reopen in the morning. Through all of this nighttime activity, the fountains continue to flow, available to anyone who needs water at any hour. A baker? Beginning his work in the deep hours of night, so that fresh bread will be available when the city wakes, draws water from a fountain near his shop. He uses this water to make his dough, mixing it with flour and salt and wild yeast captured from the air. The water becomes part of the bread, its purity contributing to the quality of the final product. This bread will be sold in the morning to hundreds of customers who will eat it with their breakfast meals, never knowing and never needing to know that the water that helped create it traveled 20 or 30 or 50 miles to reach the baker's mixing bowl. This transformation of water into bread, like all the countless transformations of water into other things that happen every day in Rome, is made possible by the aqueduct system. The water is both an ingredient and a tool, both a resource and a service. It is used directly and indirectly, primarily and secondarily, in ways that the original builders of the aqueduct probably never imagined, but that their flexible design accommodated without modification. As the night deepens and even the late working bakers finish their preparations and the night watch completes another round of the streets, the city falls into its deepest sleep. But the water never sleeps. It continues to flow through the channels and pipes, continues to emerge from the bronze spouts, continues to splash into the stone basins, continues to overflow into the gutters, continues on its journey from spring to fountain, to drain to river to sea, to sky to rain to spring again. This is a true marvel of the aqueduct, not that it brings water to the city, but that it does so with such constancy and reliability that the city can function and grow and prosper without ever worrying about whether the water will be there when it is needed. The Romans understood that a city is more than just a collection of buildings and people. A city is a complex system of interrelated parts, each one depending on the others. All of them together creating something greater than the sum of its components. The aqueduct is one of these essential parts, as important as the roads that bring goods to the markets, as important as the granaries that store food against times of shortage, as important as the walls that protect against invaders. Without any one of these essential systems, the city cannot function properly. With all of them working together, the city can thrive. The genius of Roman civilization was not in any single invention or achievement. but in their ability to integrate all of these systems into a functioning whole, to create an infrastructure that supported urban life on a scale never before achieved. The aqueducts were a crucial part of this infrastructure, perhaps the most crucial part, because water is the foundation of all other activities. Without water, there can be no large-scale food preparation, no public baths, no sanitation systems, no firefighting capacity, no industry requiring water in its processes. Without water, there can be no city. As the first hints of dawn begin to appear in the eastern sky, the city begins to stir once more. The night watch completes its final patrol and returns to quarters. The bakers who have been working through the night prepare to open their shops. The earliest risers emerge from their homes to begin their daily routines. And the slave woman in the household we have been observing picks up her amphora once more, preparing to make her daily trip to the fountain. She walks through streets that are transitioning from night to day, still mostly quiet, but with more activity than an hour ago. The fountain is empty when she arrives, and she fills her amphora in solitude, enjoying these few moments of peace before the day's work begins in earnest. As she fills the vessel, she notices that the water seemed particularly cold this morning, colder than usual, and she wonders briefly why this might be so. She does not know that there was a heavy rainstorm in the hills yesterday, and that this rain has made its way underground to the spring, and that this newly arrived rainwater is colder than the usual flow. But she appreciates the coolness nonetheless, imagining how refreshing this water will taste when her mistress drinks it. She lifts the full amphora to her shoulder and begins the walk home. The sun is just beginning to clear the horizon, casting golden light across the rooftops of Rome. It will be a beautiful day, warm but not oppressively hot, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. The streets will fill with people going about their business. The markets will be crowded with sellers and buyers. The baths will be busy with those seeking to start their day with a thorough wash. The workshops and shops will hum with activity. And through it all, the fountains will flow, providing water to anyone who needs it, maintaining the rhythm of daily life that has characterized Rome for generations. The water in the aqueduct continues its journey, always moving, always flowing, always providing. New water from the spring is arriving every moment, replacing the water that has just been drawn from the fountains, or diverted to the baths, or supplied to private connections. This constant renewal ensures that the water is always fresh, never stale or stagnant, always suitable for drinking and cooking, and all the other purposes it serves. As morning fully arrives and the city awakens completely, the miracle of the Roman aqueduct reveals itself once more. Not through any dramatic display, but through the simple fact of its presence, its reliability, its constancy. The water flows because the Romans built channels to guide it. The fountains provide water because the Romans constructed a system to deliver it. The city thrives because the Romans understood that water is life, and that ensuring a reliable supply of water is one of the highest purposes to which human effort can be directed. This understanding, embodied in stone and concrete and lead pipes, in arcades spanning valleys and channels, tunneling through hills, in fountains on every corner and baths in every neighborhood, is the legacy of the Roman aqueducts. They are more than just impressive examples of ancient engineering. They are demonstrations of what humans can achieve when they apply knowledge and effort and resources to solving fundamental problems. They are reminders that infrastructure matters, that the systems we build to support daily life are as important as any monument or work of art, that the ability to deliver clean water to millions of people is an achievement worthy of respect and admiration. The sun climbs higher in the sky. The city becomes fully awake and active. The aqueduct continues its work, flowing and providing, as constant and reliable as the passage of time itself. This is how it has been for years. This is how it will be for years to come. The water flows from the spring to the city, from the aqueduct to the fountains, from the bronze spouts into the weighten vessels of those who need it. And in this flow, in this simple provision of the most essential resource, the greatness of Rome is revealed, not in conquest or glory, but in the quiet competence of systems that work, day after day, supporting the ordinary lives of ordinary people, making possible the city that became an empire, the empire that shaped the Western world. The water flows. It has always flowed. As long as humans need water and possess the knowledge and will to bring it from where it is abundant to where it is needed, it will continue to flow. This is the lesson of the Roman aqueducts, a lesson as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago, a lesson written in stone and concrete, in channels and pipes, in fountains and baths, in the daily journey of water from spring to city, from dawn to dusk, and through the night again, endless and constant and essential to life itself.